Hi, today we are going to be talking about the first four chapters of John O'Hara's Appointment in Samarra. So, last week you read the short story Winter Dreams by F. Scott Fitzgerald, where he challenges sort of this tendency that we have to equate the American dream with materialism and financial success. Much like Fitzgerald's works, Winter Dreams and The Great Gatsby, Appointment in Samara explores not only this obsession with materialism and social status, but also what happens when someone begins to lose all of those things and find that they have really nothing of substance left in their life to offer them fulfillment or well being or satisfaction. So, this is really the story of Julian English. The novel is set in the first year of the Great Depression, and so its effects are just starting to be felt. Julian is from a privileged background. He's the son of a doctor. He owns a Cadillac dealership, but as you can imagine, in the Great Depression and economic downturn, people are not really buying luxury vehicles, right? So Julian's business is suffering, and he's had to borrow money from Harry Riley. So this is sort of where we open the situation that Julian finds himself in as the novel begins. From the outside, the Englishes really seem to have kind of all the external trappings of the American dream. They're wealthy, they have a nice house in the suburbs. They're not only members of the country club, but they're really some of the more socially elite members. They're in that sort of inner circle that is defined by the smoking room at the country club. They're young, they're attractive. Julian has a good job. Really, from the outside, they have it all, right? Do you think that they would be very happy? They would be. Instagram would look great for the Englishes, right? They would have a wonderful, beautiful sort of social media platform. But as we move through the novel, what we find is that they're both really deeply unhappy people. Their marriage seems to be pretty rocky. They are both really concerned with appearance and status and wealth, but you don't see a lot of evidence of love and mutual respect between them. Really interestingly, the novel actually opens on a different couple. So as we begin the novel, we're introduced to the Fleeglers, Lute and Irma Fleegler, who, unlike the Englishes, are financially comfortable, but they're not wealthy. They don't have the exclusive address or postal code that the Englishes do. They don't belong to the country club. But Irma says that she wouldn't trade her life for Caroline English's, not if you paid her. So while the Englishes are our central characters, the Fleeglers serve as sort of a foil couple to the Englishes, and we get some insight into the lives of Julian and Caroline English based on the Fleeglers' sort of views of them and interpretation of their lives. Throughout the first chapter, we see several running motifs that will become kind of important in helping you understand some of the messages in the novel. The first is the role of alcohol throughout the novel. You see that everyone is constantly either drinking or recovering from drinking with a hangover. And remember that the novel is set during Prohibition, so just the access to alcohol comes at a price and is really available only to the more socially elite. It's kind of uh, accessible because they are privileged. So, and then of course we see Julian throwing the drink in Harry's face kind of in the first chapter. And most of the relationships and interactions that occur during the novel are fueled by drinking and or happen during parties, right? So we also see in chapter one a class division, another motif happening, that class division. The Not only do you have the people who belong to the country club and don't belong to the country club, but then we even see those class divides within the country club members. That is the most elite allowed in that smoking room to which the Englishes belong. And then you have like Al Greco and Ed Charney, who are bootleggers, right? They have plenty of money, but their money isn't earned in the respectable fashion. So therefore, they're not part of the socially elite. They're sort of kept out of that. I think back here to like Gatsby and the Great Gatsby, because he had new money, right? He wasn't part of the socially elite group that he really kind of desired to be part of. So then we also have another kind of running motif, and that is about gender. I highly recommend that you read the introduction to the novel because it will talk to you a little bit about how scandalous the novel was at the time of its publication, in no small part because of its sort of candid portrayal of women's sexuality. So there are definitely some ideas about women that could almost be considered feminist for the time. That is, there were women occupying men's spaces, the smoking room and the golf and the country club. There are female reporters, right? And even the discussions about Caroline really indicate that being a housewife isn't enough for her. She's not happy just having the house in the suburbs and the successful husband and the country club. She really wants more out of her life and out of her marriage. And so this really challenges or pushes back against the idea that women in the domestic sphere, this is really all they need for their lives, right? Caroline kind of shows that that isn't true and shows the dissatisfaction of the American housewife, right? So these are some of the kind of themes and motifs and ideas that are introduced early in the novel that you should think about as they continue. As we move into chapter 2, we see kind of a hungover Julian getting ready for Christmas. And one of the things that you notice is that he's very concerned with his appearance. It's less about how he feels and more about how he looks. As long as he has sort of the right clothes on, that's really what matters to him, is what he should wear. And then we have this interaction between Julian and Caroline, where Julian doesn't really seem to grasp the full implications of his actions the night before. He doesn't understand that there are consequences to throwing the drink in Harry Riley's face, and Caroline's trying to convey that to him. And his privilege and his arrogance really keep him from seeing that there would be any sort of repercussions, because in Julian's mind, because he is of a higher social status than Harry, he can treat him however he wants. And we'll see as we move through the novel that that's not entirely the case, right? So there's a lot kind of going on in this interaction between Julian and Caroline. And I think as you read that, consider, what are the signs here of their marriage? Does it seem to be happy? Do they seem to really love each other? What clues do we have? Image matters a lot to both of them. How they appear, how others perceive them seems to be really important. So that's another motif that kind of runs throughout the novel. Is there happiness? Is there love? Is there respect? Are these things present in their marriage? Some of the things that we might consider important in a marriage, apart from image, status, wealth. Is there a foundation there? And how self-aware are these characters? Do they seem to be really aware of their own shortcomings, and how emotionally mature do they seem? These are all kind of questions that you can ask yourself as you're exploring the novel, because they really relate to some of the larger themes about where happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction in life come from. And we see time and again with some of these readings that they're not really coming from status and wealth and material possessions, right? Notice again that we return to the Fleeglers in chapter 2. We see their Christmas morning, and then again ask some of these same questions about them. How do their interactions seem to compare to Julian and Caroline's? Whenever the author switches us back and forth between these two sets of couples, you might ask yourself, why is that contrast happening, and what is the author trying to show us by putting these two couples side by side? Also, again, returning to the gender themes here, notice that the female reporter, Lydia, who writes about the mines and the prize fights and all of the stuff in chapter 2 that we see, we're told that she can't have this job while also being a nice woman. So in other words, she's had to sort of eschew those gender norms and gender roles that society requires of her in order to have this career, right? She's entered into the public sphere. She's left the domestic sphere, in the public sphere, this domain that women don't normally occupy, and the way in which her character is perceived because of that, again, kind of plays into that motif of gender roles. In chapter 3, we meet Julian's parents and we get a little bit of background on his family history, which I think really helps contribute to his character development. So think about what we learn about Julian and how that helps us shape our idea of who he is as a character. You know, we're told that his family is one of the oldest families in Gibbsville. They're not coal people, but railroad people. Why is that distinction important, right? What does it tell us about class and the importance of that kind of running theme throughout of these class distinctions? Particularly, what is his family's relationship with money and how does that impact Julian? He's much more reckless, right, than his father, and we're told that his grandfather was also reckless. And how does that shape his relationship with his father? Um, Julian refers to his father as the doctor throughout that chapter. You'll notice again that implies a bit of a distance there. It's not dad or pop or papa or anything, any kind of affectionate term, right? It's the doctor, which again applies that sort of formality, that distance. And once again, the event involves drinking, and the concerns seem to be again focused on not so much how happy the family is, but how they appear and what their image is like, following these social protocols, etc. Um, Again, too, with this chapter, think about the interactions between Julian and Caroline, especially the discussions that they have about sex and how they respond to it. Julian feels a real possessiveness when it comes to Caroline, but he also seems very tender towards her when talking about their sexual interactions. And so, how does this fit with what we know about the rest of their marriage so far, and what does this tell us about them as characters? We also return to the Al Greco storyline here. So once again, considering why that matters and how these other characters are helping shape our understanding of some of these central themes and of the central protagonists. And then finally, in chapter 4, we get some more insight into Caroline and Julian's marriage, as well as their relationships with other members of the Lantanago Country Club. That is, all of their friends. And I'm putting friends in quotation marks because really I think what we start to learn here is that some of the characters are really friends by proximity. That is, they don't have necessarily a close relationship in the sense of emotional closeness, but they spend a lot of time together, they drink a lot together, and it's mostly because they fall into the same social set. They have the same money, they check sort of all the same boxes. But, you know, ask yourself what is at the foundation of these relationships? What are their relationships built upon, right? So there's also this really brief moment when Julian is going into the party where he's reflecting on the snow, and that's a nice moment to think about the importance of imagery in literature. Snow, right, is an equalizer. It's part of nature. It's natural, but when everything is covered in snow, you really can't tell whose car is the most expensive or who has the nicest house. Everything looks the same, and everything looks really clean and white and pure. So you get this image of nature as not only this equalizer, but this really sort of nice, comforting, pure moment. It's also associated with cold and winter, but Julian repeats that it doesn't do you any harm, right? And he longs to, as he says, get more of that. So we have this nice moment of Julian's where he seems to be sort of taking himself out of this country club party mindset and really spending a moment outside in nature, and that's offering him some reprieve. And so what does that tell us, and how is that sort of contributing to maybe some of the underlying themes or messages, that imagery of the snow and that moment of Julian in nature? And so as you read through this chapter in the party scene, then look at how the characters interact with each other and treat each other. And again, go back to those themes about gender and class and how these interactions sort of shape their opinions about each other and shape our understanding of these characters. And think about the way in which they judge each other, right? And that's a form of otherizing someone, distancing them from yourself, and by extension, sort of making you feel better about yourself. And I guess when we start thinking about the way in which these characters are kind of seeing me and them and otherizing each other and putting each other into these different social boxes. And what impact does that have on the characters and on their feelings of happiness and life satisfaction? So that's really kind of, it's a lot to unpack in these first four chapters, but I wanted to introduce you to some of these central, themes and motifs and images that you'll see and get you started thinking about that. And we'll continue this discussion next week as we read chapters 5 through 10 of Appointment in Samarra.